Good day, grade 12. Our topic this week is poetry. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to number 1, identify present and prevailing literary convention in a poetry. Number 2, analyze themes, elements, and techniques used in poetry. And number 3, compose and perform a spoken poetry. According to Thomas Hardy, an English novelist and poet and a Victorian realist who was influenced by Romanticist poets such as William Wordsworth, poetry is emotion put into measure. The emotion must come by nature, but the measure can be acquired by art. By this, we mean that poems are a form of writing that's often rich with emotion, and they are meant to provoke an emotional response from its readers. Poetry is a way of expression or a way with words. It is a way in which a person writes down their feelings. However, some may be surprised to know that poetry does not always have to be about or need to involve emotion. Nothing says poetry has to be about emotion. Emotion may be standard in poetry, but it is not a priority. One of the giants of modern literature, T.S. Eliot, once said that immature poets imitate and mature poets steal. This means that if you are good enough, you will not only try to write something similar to another poet, but you will take his words, change them, and make them your own, so that the end result is a new work of art. It might also be taken to mean that if you are good enough, the fact that you took something from another poet will not be recognized, since your work will eclipse the source. At this point, let us start to talk about what poetry is and what poetry is not. What is poetry? Poetry is an imaginative response to an experience reflecting a keen awareness of language. It is often described as literature in metrical form or compositions forming rhythmic lines. It has a set of specific features that differentiate it from other forms of literature. It is not necessary that all elements should be employed in every poem that is written. However, the presence of at least two of these elements are noted in most poems. After this slide are terms that you should familiarize yourself with when studying poetry. Speaker. In poetry, the speaker is the voice behind the poem, the person we imagine to be saying the thing out loud. It's important to note that the speaker is not the poet. Even if the poem is biographical, you should treat the speaker as a fictional creation because the writer is choosing what to say about himself. Theme. Theme is the lesson about life or statement about human nature that the poem expresses. To determine theme, start by figuring out the main idea, then keep looking around the poem for details such as the structure, sounds, word choice, and any poetic devices. Diction. Diction can be defined as a style of speaking or writing determined by the choice of words by a speaker or a writer. Diction, or choice of words, often separates good writing from bad writing. It depends on a number of factors. Firstly, the word has to be right and accurate. Secondly, words should be appropriate to the context in which they are used. And lastly, the choice of words should be such that the listener or reader understands easily. Individuals vary their diction depending on different contexts and settings. Therefore, we come across various types of dictions. Now, there are 4 types of dictions. Kindly note this down because this is not included in the presentation. The first type of diction is formal diction, which uses formal words in formal situations such as press conferences and presentations. The next one is informal diction, which uses informal words in conversations such as writing or talking to friends. The third one is colloquial diction, which uses words common in everyday speech, which may be different in different regions or communities. And lastly, slang diction. This is the use of words that are newly coined or even impolite. Imagery. In poetry, imagery is a vivid and vibrant form of description that appeals to readers' senses and imagination. Despite the word's connotation, imagery is not focused solely on visual representations or mental images. It refers to the full spectrum of sensory experiences, including internal emotions and physical sensations. Meter and rhythm. These are similar but not identical concepts. Rhythm refers to the overall tempo or pace at which the poem unfolds, while meter refers to the measured beat established by patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. Poets who write free verse generally de-emphasize or ignore meter and focus instead on refining and tuning their natural speech rhythms to suit the poem's tone and content. Verse and refrain. In a poem or song, a refrain is a line or group of lines that regularly repeat, usually at the end of a stanza in a poem or at the end of a verse in a song. In a speech or other prose writing, a refrain can refer to any phrase that repeats a number of times within the text. Stanza. In poetry, a stanza is used to describe the main building block of a poem. It is a unit of poetry composed of lines that relate to a similar thought or topic, like a paragraph in prose or a verse in a song. Every stanza in a poem has its own concept and serves a unique purpose. A stanza may be arranged according to rhyming patterns and meters. It can also be a free-flowing verse that has no formal structure. Rhyme. A rhymed poem is a work of poetry that contains rhyming vowel sounds at particular moments. Common vowel sounds are also known as assonance, not to be confused with consonants, which refers to common consonant sounds. There are many varieties of rhyming poetry within the English language. Not all poetry rhymes, however. Blank verse, for instance, is a poetic form that features rhythmic rules but no rhymes. On the same note, free verse makes no requirements for meter or rhyme. When working with rhyme, always remember that the most important part of a verse is the last word. The last word of each verse is what establishes the rhyme. Here is an example of a rhyme scheme. This is Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare. I have here 8 misconceptions about poetry, and I will try to summarize these into 3. First, anyone who reads contemporary poetry knows that poems do not have to rhyme. Unless there is a rhyme scheme mandated by the poem's form, rhyming can often feel elementary. There is nothing wrong with rhyming, of course, it just isn't required. Next, it is a myth that all poems are dangerous and so deep that only a lucky few can understand and appreciate it. Any number of other poets who are currently alive and publishing can help prove this myth wrong. Poetry is about language, and playing with language can be fun. The big lesson to unlearn about poetry is that it is easy to read because it is often shorter than stories and novels. Nope. Poetry can be much more difficult because it is so short. There aren't as many words to analyze or ask questions about. A story has room to spell out conflicts, settings, and character backgrounds, and a poem gives you less to puzzle through. This is part of the joy of poetry. There are 2 languages in poetry. The first one is the figurative language. Figurative language is used to create a special effect in feeling, characterized by figures of speech or language that compares, exaggerates, or words that mean something other than its literal meaning. The most common and more important form of figurative language comes when poets compare one thing to another. The big 3 types of comparisons are metaphor, simile, and personification. Simile is a poetic comparison between unlike objects that incorporates the words like or as. The second language in poetry is the literal language, which means the exact primary meaning of a word or words. Some people let poetry intimidate them because they get the idea that poetry is all about rhyming, iambic pentameter, and obscure language. While it is true that some of the most beautiful poems are also difficult to understand, poetry in general isn't that tough. By having creativity, emotion, artistic quality, and logic, pure and easy on the ears poem can be produced. Some read poetry for discovering and exploring the deeper meanings and connections of the world. Those who expect philosophical insights from their poetry might often prefer poetry that is mysterious. Something that forces them to look and think twice, not just at the poem, but at the world around them. Poets can use symbols to speak of the world in deeper ways than we are accustomed to thinking. Besides this reason, there are also some people who read and write poetry for self-understanding, moral strengthening, escaping from the world, and or changing the world. Poetry is so important because it helps us understand and appreciate the world around us. Poetry's strength lies in its ability to shed a sideways light on the world so the truth sneaks up on us. No question about it. Poetry teaches us how to live. Figurative language. Figurative language refers to a language that deviates from the conventional order and meaning to convey a complicated meaning, colorful writing, clarity, or evocative comparison. It uses an ordinary sentence to refer to something without directly stating it. It is also characterized by the use of figures of speech. The next 6 slides contain the most common figures of speech used in writing. Simile. Simile is a figure of speech involving the comparison of one thing with another thing of a different kind. This is used to make a description more emphatic or vivid. Examples are, she looks like an angel. Her lips are as sweet as honey. Metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. Examples are, she is a walking stick. He is an animal when he eats. Personification. Personification is the attribution of a personal nature or human characteristics to something non-human. Examples are, the wind whispered through the trees. The sun smiled down on the earth. The flag waved at us. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is the formation of a word from a sound associated with what is named. Example is, the hissing of the snake. Hyperbole. Hyperbole are exaggerated statements or claims not meant to be taken literally. Example, I have been waiting for 1,000,000 years. Allusion. Allusion is an expression designed to call something to mind without mentioning it explicitly. This is an indirect or passing reference. Example, an allusion to Shakespeare. Metonymy. Metonymy is the substitution of a term naming an object closely associated with the word in mind for the word itself. Examples, suit for business executive, the track for horse racing. Paradox. Paradox is a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. Example, in a paradox, he has discovered that stepping back from his job has increased the rewards he gleans from it. Irony. Irony is when there are two contradicting meanings of the same situation, event, image, sentence, phrase, or story. In many cases, this refers to the difference between expectations and reality. Irony is often used for critical or humorous effects in literature, music, art, and film. In conversation, people often use verbal irony to express humor, affection, or emotion by saying the opposite of what they mean to somebody who is expected to recognize the irony. Examples are, water, water everywhere, nor any a drop to drink. Truly, truly, you're a dizzying intellect. Oxymoron. An oxymoron is a figure of speech that puts together opposite elements. The combination of these contradicting elements serves to reveal a paradox, confuse, or give the reader a laugh. The word oxymoron is derived from the Greek phrases oxus and moros, meaning a mix of sharp and keen and dull and dumb. Alliteration. Alliteration is the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. Example is, she sells seashells down by the seashore. Assonance. In poetry, assonance is the repetition of the sound of a vowel. Examples are, fire at the private eye hired to pry in my business. I must confess that in my quest I felt depressed and restless. Types of poetry. A limerick is a humorous poem consisting of 5 lines. The first, second, and fifth lines must have 7 to 10 syllables while rhyming and having the same verbal rhythm. The third and fourth lines should only have 5 to 7 syllables, and they too must rhyme with each other and have the same rhythm. Sinkane is a short, usually unrhymed poem consisting of 22 syllables distributed as 2, 4, 6, 8, 2 in 5 lines. It was developed by the Imagist poem Adelaide Crapsey. Sinkane poetry is easy and fun for children to read and write. Diamante poem is a poem that makes the shape of a diamond. The poem can be used in two ways, either comparing and contrasting two different subjects or naming synonyms at the beginning of the poem and then antonyms for the second half of the subject. In the poems, the subject is named in one word in the first line. The sonnet has become popular among different poets because it has a great adaptability to different purposes and requirements. Rhythms in sonnets are not strictly followed. It could be a perfect poetic style for elaboration or expression of a single feeling or thought. Due to its short length, it is easy to manage for both the writer and the reader. A ballad is a poem that tells a story, usually but not always, in 4-line stanzas called quatrains. The ballad form is enormously diverse, and poems in this form may have any one of hundreds of different rhyme schemes and meters. Nearly every culture on earth produces ballads, often in the form of epic poems relating to the culture's mythology. However, the word ballad typically refers to the relatively short lyrical poems produced by European poets starting around the 13th century. A haiku is a Japanese poem which can also be known as a hokku. A haiku poem is similar to a tanka but has fewer lines. A haiku is a type of poetry that can be written on so many themes, from love to nature. It consists of 3 lines. The first and last lines of a haiku have 5 syllables and the middle line has 7 syllables. The lines rarely rhyme. A blank verse is a literary device defined as an unrhyming verse written in iambic pentameter. In poetry and prose, it has a consistent meter with 10 syllables in each line, where unstressed syllables are followed by stressed ones, 5 of which are stressed but do not rhyme. Free verse is a type of poetry that does not contain patterns of rhyme or meter. Free verse is considered an open form of poetry, as opposed to poetry written in structure or form and tends to follow natural speech patterns and rhythms. While some rhyme and rhythm may occur in free verse poems, the poet does not adhere to strict patterns. However, this does not imply that free verse has no guiding principles. Indeed, free verse generally contains poetic lines and poetic imagery that distinguish it from prose. That will be all for this week's lesson, everyone. I hope that you learned. Thank you very much.